Good evening. It's just me tonight. In addition, much equipment issues. So we're late starting. Sorry, everybody. You on YouTube, of course, probably won't notice, unless I also am late uploading this, in which case, sorry about that too. Not the episode we thought we were going to get. By the way, Wild Speculations. I'm Daniel. We're talking about Critical Role Campaign 3, Episode 34, What Dreams May Come. For most of the day, it was bugging me about where I knew that from. And finally, I broke down and I searched for it. It's from Hamlet. Which then I got really upset with myself because that's like my favorite Shakespeare play. It's from Act 3, Scene 1. And Critical Role now joins such luminaries as Star Trek in pulling titles from that soliloquy. Star Trek 6, The Undiscovered Country, is from that soliloquy. And the lead into it is, "For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come." So, perfect title for the episode. I expected, well, I joked, that we would have, red as the opening sort of line, joking like how Brennan started Exandria Unlimited Calamity. But instead, it's white. And Matt did something I didn't expect, and I thought was interesting. And I expected a little bit of exposition or lore in the first half of this episode. We didn't get the lore I was expecting. We got character lore, a little bit. And we begin with FCG. And I think what we saw was, and not in this order, his creator, his target, and the resulting celebration after the Automata uprising. They're winning their freedom. The way Matt worded him being with the old woman, and then she's not there, I think is indicative that FCG killed her. And that may have been the beginning of his break. I think it's interesting to think about the timing of the movement to freedom and the assassinations, and when that all happened, and if the uprising was a result of these assassinations and certain units going against their programming. Yeah, Rose, all the information we have thus far is that he was planted. Next was Chetney. And Matt mentioned two loves, two romances, and him becoming obsessed with his work and centuries passing by until he had the hunger and ripping his skin off, becoming a werewolf. And Ruidus noticing him was, to me, the biggest part of that. Because Matt has previously said that lycanthropy is controlled by Katha, not Ruidus. Now we may be getting a supercharged version, or maybe that's how the Blood Hunters actually gain control of the curse, because that hasn't really been explored. It's just stated that they do. So it will be interesting to see, because this is the first indication we've had that Matt's going to explore the lore behind the Blood Hunter in Exandria, and the Lycans specifically. So I think that's going to be interesting. Next is Ashton, where he sees his mother and father, elven father, specifically. And there were bits of this that kind of reminded me of Conan the Barbarian. And maybe it's just because Ashton is a barbarian. But just sort of the image of his holding his mother's hand and this serpent mask. I think it was, maybe I'm conflating them. Well, the leather mask. Let's begin. So I'm wondering if Ashton is also out of time, displaced in time in some way. Or maybe he's reincarnated. There's a lot of interesting potential things that could lead to him, to that ritual happening way back a long time ago, and Ashton being here now. And reincarnation would be an interesting possibility. Yeah. Next is Laudna. The reaction of Marisha and the others at the table was interesting. Considering, like, they did the Legend of Vox Machina cartoon between, all this. But everyone's reaction was pretty visceral, I thought, of dinner. And going into her point of view, basically, of leading up to the dinner. Delilah always being in her periphery now. Is she her? Is she Delilah? Interesting talk, especially for the end of the episode. Next is Imogen, beginning with her mother, and then Otahan entering the picture. And Imogen's mother, run. And Otahan confronting her. Everywhere she turned, Otahan was there. And not in the distance, but like right here. Right up in her face. The thing that sort of tickled me about that was everything Odahan was saying about embrace your nature, don't fight it, has come out of the mouth of Chetney. Almost every single word. And I'm interested to see how that's going to play out in the coming episodes, because I don't think it was really addressed here. Imogen basically kind of shut down and hasn't sort of rebooted it. She's still sort of in a state of shock, and the only thing she's concerned about is making sure Ashton doesn't drag Laudna or put her in the hole, or they don't take her stuff. And she hasn't really been, and even though they kind of discuss what they saw in their visions, she did not say what Odahan was saying, to my recollection anyway. It was just Odahan was there, and I blasted her, and then we were all back. So I'm waiting, because it's probably going to be Chetney to maybe Ashton or FCG, where he starts laying down some of that stuff. Chetney, I mean, that Odahan was saying. And as soon as he starts saying that, that's when it's going to trigger Laura to say something, especially if she's in the scene, if Imogen is in the scene with them. And also informs the light that Ruidus put on Chetney in his vision. That he is basically espousing everything that Odahan is saying. So, yeah. After that, we return to reality, after she blasts Odahan. And the block is wrecked. Who knows how many people died. But all of her friends are exactly where they were before, in exactly the condition they were. Which means I was 100% wrong in my belief that we could see this opportunity to sort of hand wave the deaths, or give them an alternate opportunity to bring people back. So I was like, oh wow, okay. So this is where we're at, all right? And I said they have the resources to bring everybody back. Based on the information we had at the end of the episode, that was true. They had 2 people down, they had enough diamonds for 2 castings of Revivify, and they had the spell slots to do that. We begin with Laudna's turn, as you were next in the initiative order. Oh yeah! And then it got real again. And the math was on her side. Death saves, off the bat, for anyone, 55% chance of success, which means you are more likely to succeed than fail. She has a particular bonus on death saves. If she rolls a 16 or above, it's as if she had rolled a natural 20. She comes back at 1 hit point, which means she had a 25% chance to come back with 1 hit point. And she rolled a 1. Scott is famous for doing this on his death saves. He almost always rolls a 1, which of course is 2 failures. Sometimes this happens on the first roll. Sometimes it happens on the second. And if he's lucky, he succeeded the first time. But more often than not, he did not. So, yeah, Rose, he was upset by quite a bit. And it made me think about 1D&D and the new rules that they're playtesting about a 1 always failing and a 20 always succeeding no matter the roll. And this roll, if you didn't have a bad taste in your mouth over that before, maybe you do now. Although 1s have always been 2 failures on a death save. But it was just like, yeah, people want this mechanic. But anyway, I'm digressing. But that's where my brain went to, is, you know, that 5% fail success on every roll. Is it really what we want? But I admire Sam for asking if this was the metagame pigeon or not, when he says, "Do I know that Fern can cast Revivify?" And I think the answer is no. And the way that Fern went into casting her spell would seem to indicate no. She says she's never done it. She doesn't know what to do. And so to me, it was definitely the metagame pigeon a little bit. Now, they were right that FCG knew that she could heal, and she has healed before. And maybe that's enough to hang his hat on, that I know she can heal, maybe she can do this. All right, fair enough. Fern's glimpse of the afterlife was interesting. And I got into this a little bit on Twitter. That there are some thoughts of cosmology in D&D that Fae do not have souls. They are akin to sort of devils and demons, which is why the Oath of the Ancients can turn them. And one of the reasons why potentially elves and gnomes, Fae creatures, live so long is they don't have a soul, so they don't die until they're ready to, until they don't want to exist anymore. Fern's glimpse of what the afterlife looked like for her, with eyes looking back at her, dark and hungry. And it's obviously the Feywild she's looking at. Seems to indicate that Matt is going to treat Fae who die in the material plane much like devils and demons. They go back to their plane of origin and are reborn in some way. Devils and demons sometimes face demotion. And that was a big part of Campaign 1 with the Rakshasa, and trying to get hit, having to go, extraplanar to kill him so that he stops coming back to try to kill Vax'ildan. So that was the most interesting part of that. And I think Ashley just wanted to, well, maybe I won't come back. Because Matt has always said that it is up to the player and, i.e., the character, whether or not they will come back. So not only does he have the fail chance of failure of the spell, but the player might say, nah. Now, I think that's unlikely in Critical Role, just because they have so much in these characters. And Rose, I also thought that too. Orem would say no. But he didn't. But one of the things that Scott was mentioned to me was, and he was excited in the sense of his ship, that Ashton seemed more upset than Imogen. And I kind of laughed. And I said, it's sort of, there was a little bit of the same energy as when Scanlan died and Grog was yelling, "Fix him!" Not quite the same, but similar. I felt that Ashton and Imogen were the only two that were really freaked out about it. And I loved Ashton go, "Look, message Gianna Hexam, tell her I'll do anything." And Imogen's like, "Fuck Gianna Hexam. Like, what the hell are you talking about?" And they had a bit of a how do I, not really a debate, but a slight sort of touch base on whether or not they're at full speed or not. And I will say this. There are many places in the rules that differentiate between a creature and what a creature is after they expire, which is an object, a corpse. And the grapple rules say, moving with a creature you have grappled, your speed is halved. You can carry an object so long as it's within your carrying capacity. And I don't know if Matt did want to, or he let them just move, basically. And it just sort of made me laugh a little bit, knowing that that's the rule, and that they use carrying capacity in the loosest of terms on the show, and their capacity of their carrying objects is ignored, and as it is at most tables. And yeah, Rose is right, because she's just skin and bones. Yeah. But yeah. Imogen plants the rock on her and entreats Delilah. Look, you need to bring her back, basically. And they continue the round by round action. And I've had moments at my table in a similar situation where the party's wrecked, people are dying, and I had a player sort of get annoyed that I was still counting an initiative order, because they just wanted to get to him and help. And I'm like, I appreciate that, but there are things that have to be done. Sort of, there's there's time limits and rounds, and we have to do these things. So I like that Matt did it, and I just want to put that out there because I've also, I sort of busted Brendan's balls about how long it took him to resolve all of the magic items blowing up and all that stuff. And to me, I think that he could have done that much faster. But this was, I think, the right way to do it. And Jangdor, they do mention, Orem does mention Keyleth. And there's a lot of excitement about whether or not that's going to happen. And who is going to play Keyleth. And whether or not Taliesin will get to enjoy Marisha playing two characters in the same scene, in the same way that they made him enjoy playing two characters in the same scene with Caduceus and now I'm drawing a blank on the name he eventually gave himself, but Molly. In the moment, they were calling him Molly, and he hadn't yet chosen his new name. So yeah, and as much fun as that would be, I don't think that's going to be the way that they do it. I don't think so. Not impossible. I don't think it's going to be that, because, and I don't think the players would want it, but the temptation becomes so great to fall back, mommy fix it, and it becomes a real issue. Like, a lot of players say, why don't, if this wizard is high enough level to have, this wizard tower and can teleport and everything, why the hell isn't he going out and doing this stuff? Why is he having us do it? And sometimes because he's got other shit to do and he's going to delegate this. Sometimes that's a good enough answer. But with resurrection magics, healing magics, an NPC that's got it, why don't you keep going back? Or calling on them? They are not high enough level yet to just go to them, but that's not far off. So, I don't know. It's a tight rope they're walking, dancing around Keyleth. I loved that they had to choose who's going to live and who's going to die. And sort of who tells their story, to touch back on Hamilton. And Laura gets it before everybody else, as usual. And yeah, Rose, your attack on Tywin moment. Although I still stand by that Fern was not Ackerman. But I do buy Ashton and Imogen as Aaron and Mikasa. And what I mean by Laura gets it before everyone else is she was getting angry as they were trying to bring the two corpses nearer to each other. And she's like, why? So that they could be next to each other when you choose? Like, I think she just wanted them to just cast a spell and pull the Band-Aid off. And it was yeah, the voting was hilarious. Who votes for Orem? I laughed so much on that, but I think I may have laughed darkest when Fern tries to get Imogen to choose, because like Imogen is already blaming herself for this whole thing, and it's like, oh, you have this guilt for bringing this upon us. Can we add to it by making you choose between our friends? I was just like, oh man. Oh. And she, understandably, was like, I know. And largely, I think because if it was up to her, she would have chosen Laudna. And Sam, 100% correct. FCG says Orem would say, save Laudna. The comment basically got ignored. And at one point, they do kind of turn to Liam, and he's like, I'm out of this. I'm not contributing at all. And they got upset at him because they want his input. And he's dead. He can't give it. I love that moment. And Marisha, same kind of thing. She was quiet. But they weren't trying to get anything out of her. But I like that Marisha was just quiet, and she, at one point, she put on the sweatshirt, the skeleton in the coffin, everything's fine. I think that's what it said, something like that. Yeah, so good. But they decide to flip a coin, and they're going to use the Changebringer coin that FCG has. I don't know if they got, if like Matt actually gave Sam a coin of like a Changebringer coin, or if it was just a challenge coin. Because I'm quite positive one of them at some point in their con journeys has been given a challenge coin. So I know that they have, somebody has one, at least. And if I had to guess, Travis probably has multiple. But they flip the coin, and Orem is who the coin decides. And I think Matt, behind the screen, every time FCG prays or entreats, or does, I think he's marking something down, because when FCG prayed to the Changebringer, to the coin, you know, show us the right one, Matt was like, so it will be interesting to see how that plays out. The most interesting part, mechanically speaking, was Imogen sending to Delilah. Her receiving and then responding. Because that is indicative of many things in the planar scape of things. Is she in the Shadowfell? Is she in the Hells? The Abyss? Is she the principal lieutenant in whatever realm Vecna rules from? Because we don't know that answer yet either. So that to me was the most interesting aspect of that. And she gets back from Delilah. Well, why don't you save her for me, dear? Orym sees Zephyra and Will. And Will says to him, you're not done. Much like Yasha's wife, whose name I'm blanking on, said to her in her visions. So, until that moment, I thought Orym might say no. But Will sort of, you're not done, and I will be here waiting for you when you are, gave him permission to go. I think Liam was the most ready to make a new character, but he was spared it. So we'll get to see that character in Campaign 4. Because Caleb was the backup for Vax. So we'll see. But as soon as Marisha got up from the table, and watching it live, I was like, well, that's out of nowhere. But on my rewatch, I noticed the husband-wife silent communication happening. And then she gets up. And then everyone and people are like, oh, Scott turned it off. That was it for him that night. And he was watching it live. He said he had to go back and watch the rest later. Because he was so upset by his ship sinking. And by the math. And then, of course, later in the episode, when they're like, oh, wow, if we would have given this to Laudna, she could have re-rolled that D20. And it's like, oh, man. And the funny thing is, he was saying they were going to bring her back with the Dunamancy potion. So, sort of, they could have. But, yeah, that was... Everyone was pretty wrecked, and Matt says, we're going to take an early break. They come back, and Sam Sharp, he noticed Ashley putting the coin in her pocket. And so when they come back from break, FCG's like, hey, give me the coin back. And Fern said no. And I didn't see her give it back. So that's interesting. And we will see if that has any ramifications. I laughed so hard when they're like, yeah, we'll short rest. And Matt's like, okay, sure, you guys can take a short rest. So those who have hit dice are spending them, and Laura goes, oh shit! It's a long rest that my sorcery points come back on. She's like, I'm not going to be able to do this till tomorrow. And it's like, well, then I guess we're going to have a long rest. So funny. And Matt did try to help her out with saying, do you have lower level spell slots? You can sort of trade them up. Yeah, Rose, it's the recharge of your abilities is an important thing to watch. And even I have gotten stuck behind that because I'm like, oh man, I thought this was a recharge short or long rest. Damn it. Oh well. Guess I'm not going to do that this time. Which is one of the nice things about a fighter. Most of the abilities recharge in a short rest. And the nice thing about rogues, almost none of their abilities ever recharge. They just do it. So, yeah. The caster long rest stuff can be rough. Which is why the warlock is so nice. Because Laudna could do that. If they took a short rest, she would get her warlock spell slots back. She can convert them into spell points and then change that into whatever sorcerer level spell that she wanted. But we'll see if we ever get to see that happen. Too soon? Chetney wanting to open the boxes was hilarious. And yeah, prepare Rose. I do write some of my jokes for the audience next to me, but yes, he's not here, so I have to imagine the groans and dirty looks. Chetney making his wooden lockpicks was awesome, but also made me kind of, they sort of gave that one to Vax'ildan in Legend of Vox Machina, when he just takes Grog's toothpick to pick the lock. So I was like, well, flavor is flavor, I guess. But he opens the boxes with hot-ish dice. He missed the DC apparently by 1. And so Matt just sort of made it take longer and gave it to him. Which was very kind, because the tools he was using, Matt said if you rolled less than a 20, they're going to break. So he could have made Travis roll again. And there was a 95% chance that was only going to result in the breaking of his tools and not opening the box. And rather than spin their wheels in frustration, he gave it to him. They find potions of possibility, which FCG identifies after their long rest. Giving 2 modes, which I think is an upgrade from Campaign 2. I think it was just 1. And giving the description that you have something floating about you was interesting. And they find residuum in the heavy metal box. And I thought about doing the math on how much that box weighed, because you can do the math. We know the density of iron, and we know the size of the box, and we know the volume of the box and the volume of empty space within. So we could find the weight of that box. It is probably very heavy, and I didn't bother doing the math because I didn't think anyone would care. So, you're welcome. But 3 inches of metal blocks detection spells. So if you're going to smuggle something magical, that's how you got to do it. Or a thin piece of lead. And apparently, iron is just easier to work with in the Cerberus assembly. Or whoever... I'm presuming that it's all coming from the Cerberus assembly, but it may not be. So it may be coming directly from Whitestone or Iman, wherever Whitestone is exporting the residuum to. So yeah. I thought it was interesting that Sam, FCG, says, doesn't she have items on her person that might be helpful in getting her back? I.e., why don't we distribute her stuff amongst us? And Imogen almost resists at first, but they had already sort of taken care of her personal effects and said, why don't you take care of them? And okay, what does she have? One of the things that she has is that receiver for the ring that she put on Otahan. And that is probably the most useful item that she has on her person that they really need to take control of and keep an eye on. The immovable rod is useful. My current character is getting a lot of use out of his. But yeah, she definitely does have some items that they can be using. And like, well, we'll have to get with her later. But I think they can go into each other's sheets, so I think technically they could have gone in and looked. So, yeah. They do sendings. Not to Keyleth, Jangdor. Notably, not to Keyleth. To Xandus and Esteros. And then another to Esteros. Both to say, we've got Treshy. We lost Laudna. We're coming back. Can you help? And then, oh, you're in danger because the leader of the Paragon's Call knows that you sent us. And Xandus is like, oh yeah, we've been circling. We'll come by. I think circling... I don't know. I don't know if it's better or worse than parking it and then moving if you have to. Where if they're circling, they've been being watched for a few days. So, an interesting difference than what the plan was, because the plan originally was for them to park somewhere and then come back. The inspection of the Paragon's call of Imahar Joe's, and that tense moment, and then Imogen prestidigitating all the dust away so they can't find tracks. It was interesting that Matt kept the door hidden, because it was a hidden door. Chetney had to make a roll to find that door that they were hiding behind. But it was interesting to me that they didn't find it. They leave. Thank Joe for his always faithful service. And if you see him, come and tell us. Yeah. There was a little bit of Avatar The Last Airbender when the Fire Nation soldiers come to Horu's house. And the Avatar gang are hiding. And then they come out. Yeah. But FCG casts Gentle Repose on Laudna. And Matt says, nobody else notices but you do, because you cast the spell, basically. You notice it stopped something. Which is where I'm like, so there was Ex Machina solution to this. And maybe Matt discussed it with Marisha and what was going to happen. Because there are several ways that the half-dead girl could come back as all undead instead of just half undead. An option that seems to be on the table. But I would be willing to bet if that came about, is it going to be a Lucian situation where she comes back, but it's not Laudna, it's Delilah. And she's going to be a villain for them. So I'm wondering which direction that was going to go. The gift exchange between FCG and Chetney was hilarious and heartwarming. And I think Travis did some research on paints and the chemistry behind them, because he's like, yeah, that's corrosive or something. It took my fingerprints off. But yeah. And the skyship extraction was rough. And I like we should have just met him outside of the city. It's like, yeah, but being right there in the middle of town, sure. Chetney getting fly cast on him. We'll see where that leads to in the future and how much he wants it to happen again. And yes, Rose, they could have used the Residuum for the Revivify spell. If they had the spell slots. Which it is unclear that they did. if they had cast it in the moment. There was a lot of if, ands, could have, would have in that whole thing. Which is why, like, that first part of the episode before the break is a perfect encapsulation as to why I am so intent, let's say, on using encumbrance. Even if your DM isn't. Just for you, it is the best tool you have to know how hard your character has to work to carry their stuff. Knowing how much of what fits in every pouch, backpack, sack, basket, what have you. So you know this is how much fits in there, what's in it. Because you don't want to, if you're keeping track of this, you then know where everything is. And knowing where everything is lets you, do I drop this? If you are using encumbrance and you are slow, you can drop it at the breakout of combat so you have your full speed. Do you go back for it if you have to run, or do you abandon it? Do you, there's a bunch of questions and choices that are forced when you do that I think inform character a lot. And yeah, it's sort of heavy in the bookkeeping than a lot of people like. But really, once you do it once you have everything, adding and subtracting from it is quick and easy. And when I do it, I have this much is free. So if I pick up something and I need to put it in my stuff, how much does it weigh? What do I have? Okay, it will fit in this sack. It's going there. And then every once in a while comes a point where, okay, I think I need to rearrange this because X, Y, and Z items are going to be more important coming up than they have been, so they get shifted. And yeah, for newer players to RP, more like Liam. I don't think Liam does it like that. Of all of them, I think he is the most aware. And I think that's mostly because of what he did with Caleb and keeping track of his components and going with a component pouch as opposed to a wand or any other arcane focus. So, yeah. But it's those moments where, shit, who has what? Where are they? Where do we need to be? And time is a factor. Keeping track of your stuff as if you were doing encumbrance, or DMs use encumbrance, is great. I keep referring to it as getting into costume. A lot of actors talk about how important costume is to finding the character. That they have a certain idea, and then they get in costume, and something changes fundamentally about the way that they are going to portray the character. And using encumbrance and knowing where all of your stuff is, in what pouch is it? Is it in your backpack? And find different ways for your character to carry their stuff, because that's another expression of character. I've had characters, my Goliath Street Fighter, who's a chef, he carried his stuff in 2 sacks hanging off of a 10-foot pole because he had the carry capacity that, the 7 pounds of the 10-foot pole he didn't care about. So he was always, his position of relaxation was his hands over his poles. And in 1 sack, he had all of his kitchen stuff. So he had an iron pot, his cook's utensils, his brewery supplies, and I think something else. It was almost 30 pounds in one of the sacks, which is the capacity of it. I've got NPCs in the game I'm running with my daughter on Mondays. One of them has a trunk. He's a rogue. He carries his trunk to where he isn't going to need to be moving it, and then he drops it, and that's just where it is. And he can take sacks out of it that he has in there if he's going into a dungeon. So basically his plan, leave the trunk outside the dungeon, take what he needs out of it, and go in, come out, and drop it in. And namely, the sacks in there are for loot. But yeah, how your character carries stuff where is, I think, a big part. And just if you go to an airport and watch people, how they carry themselves and their stuff. The person with the duffel bag versus the person with the rolling suitcase versus the backpack and laptop bag. The different ways that these people are carrying their stuff reflects on how they sit, how tired they get as they go through the airport, how easy it is to access their stuff. But yeah, I'll get off my soapbox and end the episode for tonight. I think Marisha will be absent from the table this episode. I think we may get contact with Keyleth. They will have to, I think, canonically, she only knows trees. Now I'm blanking on the city name. But the city that they went to, that's on Marquette. MVP for this episode? I think it's a toss-up between Chetney and Imogen for me. Chetney because, he kept things moving, was focused, but also had some levity, in-character levity. Where Ashley's levity that was injected was table level, if that makes sense. What she did in character was not meant to make the characters laugh. And their characters did not laugh in that moment. The players did, their characters did not. But Chetney did try to have some levity in character. But I think I have to give it to Laura because she was on top of things, as she always is. And yeah, I think I have to give it to Laura. Yeah, because she was, sort of keeping with Ashton, and the heart of the episode was really her reaction to Laudna dying. And her telling and being the point of communication, and having to do that despite everything that was going on. yeah, I think for me it's Laura. Scott should be back with us next week, and no doubt he will want to devote a minute or two to next episode with you guys to touch on perhaps some of the stuff that I either didn't convey correctly or expand upon a little bit. Because I'm sure there will be things next episode that tie very nicely into this one. And yes, Rose, hopefully he can recover from his heartbreak. Until next week, everybody, take care of yourselves and each other.